Or Eric.
It's Eric. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Astro Imaging channel. I think Alex is at Tech this week. And one of the interesting things he's going to do, he's going to be interviewing a lot of people that are down there. And I think it's going to be the subject of a show a little bit later on this year, which should be interesting. But this week we have Linda Thomas-Fowler give a presentation on all sky cameras and how to build one, something I know that I've been interested in, that a couple of the people on the Astro Imaging channel already have. You know Linda, she's been on the show a couple times before and gave some very interesting presentations. One I took a brief look at on the alternate to the Hubble palette image. So I'm looking forward to a really interesting presentation. We'll be taking notes and hopefully I'll build one. Before we get going with Linda, just a couple of brief things. I think we have maybe about 30 submissions for our dust, our nebula presentation. So you have till the end of the month. I'm not going to go and show you any of the site, but you know, get those in. I know we'll probably have more towards the end. And the other thing we have going is we have a whole data set that I put up there for M33. There's one interesting fact about the M33 data. I have a show out at Fermilab, and one of the images in the show is M33 from that particular data set. The only sad thing about that is that we installed it a year and a half ago, and the day after we installed it, they shut down Wilson Hall to the public. And so it's been there for all that time, and I have never seen it, and nor has anybody else. But it is hanging there, or at least I'm told it's hanging there. I don't know. Let's see, Bruce, you want to give us just a quick elevator pitch on what you're going to talk about next week?
Sure. You know, there's been interest in getting more detail on how PhD2 works. So I thought I would choose a topic of the guiding assistant. We know there's a certain mystique around the guiding assistant and a certain lack of understanding about where all the recommendations actually come from. So my idea is to just drill down on that and explain where the recommendations originate and what all the various measurements are behind them. And it'll give you hopefully a better idea of how to take advantage of what the guiding assistant can tell you.
Okay, thanks, Bruce. And everyone over on YouTube, you know, post your questions there. We'll be watching them, and then we'll ask Linda at various times what you post. And at that point, if there's really nothing else critical, Linda, let's turn it over to you, and it's all yours.
Thanks, Eric, and hi, everybody. What we're going to talk tonight is about building an all-sky camera. Let me get my presentation going here. And so let's start with the basics. What's an all-sky camera? So most of you have seen one of these things before, or at least seen the results that they produce. And that did not do what I wanted. Hang on. You know, it's a camera along with a computer, and it takes pictures of the sky periodically so that you can see what's going on. And they're a great way to keep track of what's going on in your local sky while you're imaging, and maybe you're inside and can't see the sky. And they can also be used for other things, like maybe looking for bright meteors or tracking air traffic or seeing how your light pollution changes through the night or with the moon, that sort of thing. So this is an example of one of the things that you can do with an all-sky camera. And this is a time-lapse video of one night. And this will take a minute or so to run through. And you can see it starts with some clouds running through, but you can see the Milky Way in the background, and you can see some airplanes going through. And, you know, it looks like the sky is getting worse through the course of the night, but then it miraculously clears up. Of course, by that point, I was asleep and had given up on the night. But I was able to see that I missed at least a couple of hours window of opportunity. If I actually had my observatory built, then maybe I could have done something with that time. But at least it's interesting to see how things go. And there you can see my spouse got up and turned the kitchen light on. So that's an example of one night's time lapse. So where can you get one of these things? There are some commercial products out there, but they're really pricey, like generally over $1,000. And they usually use older CCD sensors that are not suitable for doing daytime exposures. They just can't expose short enough, or since you can't control the gain, turn the gain down enough to actually be used during the daytime. And building one of these things is actually not too hard. You don't need a lot of skills. And seriously, if I can do it, anybody can, because, well, people don't trust me with tools. And the cost can be about 1/3 to 2/3 of a commercial product, depending on the components you select. So these are the skills that you need to be able to put one of these things together. You need to be able to drill some holes in a plastic housing, be able to apply some silicone sealer to your dome. You need to assemble a Raspberry Pi and install its operating system, and then to install and configure the AllSky software. And then the one thing that I can't really give you too much guidance on, because it's going to depend very much on your local situation, is figure out how you actually mount this camera wherever you need it to go. So these are the things that you need. Don't worry about memorizing this list. We're going to go through these pieces bit by bit. But these are the major things that you're going to need. And you're going to need to drill a couple of holes, one for the dome and one for the power, and maybe one for Ethernet. And so you're going to need a hole saw and some of these spade bits of various sizes. Inside the housing, you need to mount the camera somehow. In my case, I used this little thing. It worked okay. It wasn't great, but it wasn't as stiff as I'd hoped. So it's conceivable that over time this may shift on me, although it hasn't yet. You're going to need a Raspberry Pi. I chose a Pi 4. You can use a 3. Theoretically, you could even use an older Raspberry Pi or a Pi 0. But really, a Pi 4 runs this really well. And when you can get a Pi 4 kit for less than $100, so they're not too expensive. You can get kits that include keyboard cables and other things like that. But if you don't need all that, a basic kit's just under $100. I'm not going to talk about how to put the Pi together or how to install it, but there's a great video by a YouTube channel called Patriot Astro. If you search for Patriot Astro AllSky camera, you'll find his series of videos on building this, and they're good enough to get you started on that build process. If I were to go through the Pi build process, it would take enough time that we wouldn't get to anything else. They're not hard to put together. It's basically just assembling a few pieces, and installing the operating system isn't that hard. If you know a little bit about Linux, it's easy. If you don't, you can do it with a little bit of guidance. It's not that bad. And you're going to need a ZWO camera. The software that we're talking about supports any ZWO camera. If you want to go the cheapest route, you can use the 120 MC. If you use the 178 MC and the recommended lens, you'll actually get a complete 360-degree image circle. I used the 385 MC, which gives you almost a 360-degree image circle, and it has really good sensitivity. And you can even use a cooled camera if you want, but most people are using the cheaper uncooled cameras. A lot of times people are using an older guide camera or a planetary imaging camera or something like that. So a lot of the ZWO cameras come with a lens, and that lens is fine, it works, but it's not as wide angle as it could be. And you can pick up a lens on Amazon or from other places that will give you a slightly wider field of view, and on the 178, a complete 360-degree field of view. Actually, on the 178 or any larger sensor, it'll be a wider field of view, although on the even larger sensors, like let's say you had one of the 4/3 color cameras, you'd get a complete 360-degree circle inside a mostly unused frame. So there's really not, with this lens, not much point in using those cameras. Theoretically, there are some other fisheye lenses that would work on those larger cameras, but they tend to get expensive really quickly. So I never really investigated that path in any detail. Now you're going to need a housing to put this in. In my case, I chose this big housing, but you can use something as simple as a PVC pipe with some end caps. There are also some kind of squarish watertight boxes that you can use where you end up putting the dome on the top. Those are actually a little bit easier to work with than what I chose. In my case, I needed to put in some extra equipment, and I'll talk about why later. But in my case, I needed that bigger housing, and this one worked out well for that. And you need an acrylic dome so that your camera can see out. I used a 2.5-inch dome because that was basically the largest I could fit on top of that box. But I think a larger dome actually is better because I get reflections on bright days or on bright moons. I get reflections of the lens back off the dome. So I think if your dome is a little bit further away, which a larger dome would do for you, you would at least minimize those reflections. And you need to get power up there. So if your Pi is connected via Ethernet, you have the option of using a power over Ethernet kit to put power in outside the housing and then take it off the Ethernet cable inside the housing. In my case, I needed to power a few things. In addition to the Pi, I needed to power a network little travel router and a sky quality meter. So I put in an actual power strip in there and just ran 120 volt extension cord in there. So depending on what you need, you could have different needs for different ways of getting power in. And then any cable that you need to run into the housing, you need to do in some kind of a waterproof way. And I use these things called cable glands, which I had never heard of before, but basically you drill a hole in the bottom of your housing, you take off that little piece at the bottom and then push it onto your cable, run the cable up in through the gland, and then screw that cable down. And it does two things. One, it makes a waterproof seal around the cable. And it also gives you some strain relief for that cable, so it's not just hanging loose inside the housing. And they're really easy to work with. And then you need to mount this stuff all together. Now, in my case, I don't know, can you see my mouse here, Eric?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Yeah, remember, it takes us a few seconds to click our buttons and answer your questions.
Sure thing. So here's the camera, and you can see there's a hole here for the camera to look through. This black box is the Raspberry Pi, and we just have a USB 3 cable connecting those things. And then this little power strip is the how everything's getting power. In this case, this power strip had USB ports, and I just ran a cable from over to the Pi to bring it power. And I did this kind of jury-rigged system where I used some wood to hold the camera mount and then Velcro tape to stick that all to the side. Wasn't really sure if this was going to hold, but it did, and it's been going for 3 or 4 months now without any problem. Now, I mentioned that I had other stuff going on in here, and this thing is a travel router, and it's there's a sky quality meter mounted on the other side of this box, and that sky quality meter only has an Ethernet connection, so this travel router is bringing that sky quality meter onto the network for me. And this Ethernet cable runs out the bottom and goes over to the sky quality meter. And then this black wall wart is the power for that sky quality meter, which also runs out that same port. This orange cord is the power cable. Now, I couldn't fit the power cable's end socket with the 3 pins on it in through the cable gland. So I cut that off and ran it up inside, and then at Lowe's just picked up this replacement thing. Really easy to wire together. You just screw it on. There's 3 wires inside the extension cord. You just hook them up to the 3 terminals. It's not major surgery. Again, if I can do it, anybody can do it. And that's basically all you have to do to put the thing together. So there are 3 holes I drilled, 1 here, and then 2 here at the bottom, and I think we have a better view of that later. So here's the bottom of the case. You can see these are the 2 cables going over to the sky quality meter, and then this is the power going in. Here's a view of the dome. You can just about see the lens there. One of the things I discovered is that the red paint on the ZWO camera is very reflective. And so in the daytime, I would get, and during a bright moon, I would get these red reflections off the dome that were kind of annoying. And so what I did was I sacrificed a black t-shirt and cut off a strip of material that was a little bit wider than the hole, taped that down inside the dome, or inside the housing, and then cut a slit in it that I fit the lens through. And that cut down on that reflection. It also had the side benefit of keeping most of the camera out of the direct sunlight. And in the hot summer day, it actually brought the sensor temperature down about 8 degrees Celsius, which really helped a lot because I was a little bit worried about heat. You can see that I did not do a particularly neat job of sealing this thing. So my skills are, like barely adequate, but it stays dry. It's been out in the rain a lot. It got tested the first day. I actually tested it before I put equipment in with the hose, but it got tested in the rain the first day I put it up. And it's been through several thunderstorms since without any leaks. So far, so good. So then I had to figure out how I was going to mount this thing. I don't yet have an observatory. I'm working on it. I'm also an amateur radio operator, and I had this portable antenna mast. And I thought, well, I can just hook it to that. And so this thing here is a pole mount, and you fit a hose clamp through this and wrap that around the mounting pole, and it holds it up there pretty well. And you can see down here the camera sticking through the dome, and you can see that my camera is quite close to the top of the dome, which is why I get reflections. And you can also see how reflective that red paint job is. It may look sexy, but when you've got plastic right in front of it, it's really kind of annoying. So here it is with the pole that's going to go onto the mast. You can see there's just hose clamps there holding it together. Then this little round cylinder is the housing for the sky quality meter, and I have it mounted the same way. And you can see, well, you can't really see because I don't think I have it running in through there yet, but you can see the power cord coming out, and then in a little bit I added in the cable for the power and network for the sky quality meter. So this is the mast that I have hooked up. You can see it's actually up there quite a ways. I actually took one of these segments out because the street is just on the other side of the house, and it I was getting too much light from the street, from cars driving by. So I actually brought it down one segment, which left a little bit of the house in view, but actually solved the problem of, or mostly solved the problem of streetlight reflections. Once I get the observatory built, I'll be far enough away from the road that won't be an issue, but for now it is. So now you have this thing built, but how do you actually make it go? In my case, I use this open source software written by Thomas Jacquin. Hopefully I'm pronouncing Thomas's name right, called AllSky, and you can find it on GitHub. If you go to github.com and search for Thomas Jacquin or search for AllSky, you'll find it. And this software will take images periodically during the day and night and display them for you. It'll automatically save nighttime images to disk and optionally during the day. And at the end of the night, it can produce time-lapse videos, keyograms, and we'll talk about what those are in a bit, and maybe star trail images. And it can also optionally upload these images to another server for storage. Now, until recently, there was a bug in the ZWO auto exposure code. Actually, the bug's still in ZWO's auto exposure code, but I really like the software, but during the day on a lot of the ZWO cameras, it just was not accurate. It would seriously overexpose 2 out of every 3 frames. And so I downloaded Thomas's code and kind of dug into what was going on and took a stab at writing my own auto exposure code, and it worked. And there was a guy named Eric Clays who was also working on some other enhancements, and he and I worked together, and I gave him my code. He bundled it all together and gave it to Thomas. And Eric's actually been working with Thomas to do some additional enhancements that are ongoing to the software. So now, the original code worked on the 224 MC, but it didn't work on most of the other ZWO cameras during the day. Now it should work on every camera. The existing ZWO auto exposure code still has some issues. If you have a bright moon, it can kind of pulse. You won't notice it at nighttime, but if you look at the time-lapse video, you'll see it pulsing. So I mentioned keyograms, and they're kind of a cool way to look at the night in a single view. What it is you take a slice down the center of the image and then take all of the images from the night and stitch those center slices together. So you get, where's my mouse? So you get a slice here and here and here from every bit through the night, and you stitch them all together. So looking at this keyogram, you can see that the first couple of hours of the night were cloudy, and then it cleared up, and then the moon came up during the last couple of hours of the night. And so over the course of the night, you can see that this might have been an okay image, or okay night to image, or do other observing, during these middle hours of the night. It can also generate star trails, and here it just combines all the images from a night into one, and you can see, there's Polaris and everything spinning around it. You can also see airplane trails. Theoretically, you could see if you have a bright enough meteor trails. I've not actually caught one. I was hoping to during the Pleiades, but nothing came up. And then you have the time-lapse videos, and these almost make clouds tolerable, because you get to watch all these amazing things going on right above your head that during the day they happen too slowly to see. These flashes you see in the lower part of the video are cars driving by that are reflecting off nearby trees. But you can see that a lot of my clouds come in from the south, and here north is at the bottom and south is at the top. So the clouds are kind of coming in from the southwest and moving to the northeast. Then you can see it clears up, and you can see the Milky Way wheeling overhead. These are fun ways to kind of look at what happened over the course of the night. If you have images and you're kind of wondering why something happened in an image and you can't tell why you're looking at it, was it clouds or was it something else? If you have one of these, you can go back and look at the time lapse or the actual images from that night at that time and see what was going on. One of the cool things is that the software is extendable. In my case, I had that sky quality meter that I mentioned, and I wanted to try to get that information into the all-sky camera display, and I succeeded. And you can see here this SQM line where it says 20.7. This is the reading from my sky quality meter. And what I did was I wrote a little Linux shell script that goes out and polls the sky quality meter once a minute. It just writes that information to a file. And then there's another script that grabs weather information off the net. This isn't from a local weather station. This is coming from the net, and grabs that information off the net, writes it to the file, and then the Sky Quality or the All Sky software actually grabs that text file and just adds it to its own information. So on its own, it displays the date and the time. It can optionally display the sensor temperature, the exposure information, the camera gain, and I wanted this other stuff. And it wasn't hard to get in there at all. It was actually pretty easy to do. And then as things went on, I decided, every once in a while, something happened and I needed to go reboot things. And I could reboot everything by unplugging the power down at the bottom. But if I only wanted to reboot one thing, then it was a little bit of a pain. And it turned out to be a little bit of an issue for that travel router because it needed to be on before the Sky Quality meter was on. Otherwise, the Sky Quality meter might not be able to get an IP address on the network. And then I'd have to figure out, then I have to go try and reboot it again. So I ended up adding these CASA remote power switches that are Wi-Fi controllable. And I put 3 of them in there, one for the Pi, one for the Sky Quality meter, and one for the travel router. And now I can actually independently turn on and off all of those things, which actually makes it really convenient. And I didn't take a picture when I did that, unfortunately. It's now even more crowded in that box, but it works out pretty well. So what kind of things can go wrong? Obviously, you've got a waterproof box that you've drilled holes in, so it's no longer waterproof. You need to make sure your box is waterproof after you do these things to it. Otherwise, it could be an expensive mistake. My other big concern was heat. How hot's it going to get in there? And I had a pretty big box. There's electronics in there generating heat. There's the sun beating down on it, and especially in the hot mid-Atlantic summer. How hot's it going to get inside that box? Am I going to fry the equipment? In my case, out of an abundance of caution, I got some of this reflective material that I added. Now, I'll show you a picture. I didn't have a picture in the slideshow, but I do have some pictures I can show of that. And I ended up putting one on the south-facing wall and one on the top, and not on the north. It actually seemed to do better if I didn't put too much of that stuff in there. And that actually helps keep the temperature down just a little bit. Another question is, was dew going to be a problem? Was I going to have to add anything to deal with dew? Because it's been quite humid. It's always quite humid here in the summer. And so far, dew has not been an issue. The equipment generates enough heat that that's not an issue. And then in the winter, if we get snow, how long will it take for that to melt? I don't know. I suspect not too long. The camera seems to stay pretty warm. And in my case, the camera is fairly close to the dome, so the dome is probably going to have enough heat to melt fairly quickly. And then, no software is perfect. And this software has got some quirks to it. Like I said, night exposures with the full moon pulse. You're only going to notice it in the sky, in the time lapse, not in your individual frames as you watch them live. And then if you need to update the software, it's an entirely manual process, which is a little bit awkward. I don't know whether Eric and Thomas are going to do something about that to make like a one-click update, but right now it's a little bit of work. It's not super hard. After you've done it a couple times, it's pretty straightforward. You just need to preserve your configuration file so you don't have to redo that. And you need at least a little bit of basic familiarity with Pis and Linux, but it's not a lot. There are some good videos like those Patriot Astro videos to show you how to get this installed. And here are the parts list for my build. Don't worry about remembering this. I'll have an article on my website where you can find this later and get links to this stuff. A lot of this stuff won't necessarily apply to your build if you choose to do it, because I used an extra large housing, and the way you do power and the way you do some things might be a little bit different. But there are a lot of how to build threads out there on the net. This is the end of the parts list. And so how much did this cost? In my case, the ASI 385MC was $350. The Raspberry Pi was $95. My housing was $57, but if you use a smaller housing, they're generally less than $20. The lens that I used was $55, and all the other parts were $20. When I added it all up in my case, it was about $650. If you have some of these things already, your cost could be a lot less. Like, let's say you have an old guide camera or an old planetary camera that you're not using. But a commercial all-sky camera is going to run about $1,000 to $1,200, and that's not including the computer that you're going to need to run it. So all in all, your costs here could be significantly less. So these are some of the things that you can find visiting your all-sky camera. I've got
a couple of questions on YouTube.
Sure.
So one is, are you connecting to the Pi via Wi-Fi?
Yes.
Or Ethernet?
Yeah, Wi-Fi in my case.
Okay. Using its Wi-Fi antenna?
Yeah, the Pi 4 has built-in Wi-Fi. That's another
Sweet.
good reason to choose the Pi 4.
Okay. Let's see. Would it work? Are there any concerns putting the camera outside the dome and putting the Pi inside the observatory?
You would need a longer USB cable, and USB 3 runs, tend to have trouble at length. There's no reason, though, you can't use a USB 2 cable. You're not taking video. Technically, actually, it is using video, but so that might be an issue. The way the software works is it takes video, even though you only get a still frame out of it, it puts the camera into video mode, and that video has to travel across the wire. I think that would be okay at USB 2 speeds. If you're going to do a long USB run, I would probably plug a USB 2 cable into it and not a USB 3.
You could also get like an active USB 3 cable.
Yeah, I don't have any experience with those, but yeah, in theory, that would work.
I have like a 25-foot long one that I use as a Wi-Fi antenna in my office at work. Okay. It works pretty well for that purpose, but I haven't tried it with a camera yet.
Linda, I saw you use the fisheye lens that comes with some of the ZWO cameras.
No, I wasn't using their lens. I used a different lens that I bought on Amazon.
Is there anything wrong with the fisheye lens?
No, it just doesn't have quite as wide a view.
Yeah, I've noticed that. I was thinking about looking at getting the one that you got because my field of view doesn't really capture the whole sky. So I might get a wider lens like the one that you got.
Yeah, their lens covers about 150-degree field of view, and this lens will give you 180.
Nice.
With a big enough sensor.
And
yeah, that's true.
How hot does it get in the summertime with the sun beating down?
My worst case temperature was about 60 degrees C once I put the fabric in. Before the fabric, it was getting up to about 68 degrees C.
Dang, I don't think mine's gotten quite that hot.
Yeah. And if things go well or poorly with global warming, you won't have to worry about snow.
Yeah, really.
They can survive quite high temperatures. Mine's been sitting out in the Aussie sun for over 4 years, and I've had sensor temperatures of 80 degrees, because remember, it is in a box sitting in the sun, and it has survived. I think the camera's come off a little bit. He's got a lot of hot pixels now, but the Raspberry Pi will go into there's thermal stuff in the Pi. It'll actually cut the speed down. It'll drop back, so you have that protection as well.
Yeah, my Pi got as high as about 75 degrees C, which was a little hotter than I wanted to see it. With the change that I made with the fabric and with the extra reflective material, it seems to max out at about 60 now. And the sensor is maybe 60, 61, something like that.
Something that I got for the box that I was going to put my my mini PC, my Intel NUC inside of, was like a downward facing vent that you could put a fan on the other side of. So it's not waterproof, but like if as long as the rain's not being pushed upwards, then it's going to keep the rain out. That could be something to consider.
Yeah, I thought about putting a fan in there, but it was testing my comfort level with build competence, and I figured I'd try it this way first and see how it behaved, and then put in a fan if I needed one. So far, I think it's, I put it up in July, I think, or late July, and it's been pretty good since then. The first couple days before I put the fabric and the extra material in there, it got pretty hot, but since then it's been controlled.
Somebody mentioned earlier in the chat they used an electrical box.
Yeah, some people have used those. Yeah, they were a little more expensive, but those would work.
But they come with knockouts for, instead of having to drill your own holes.
True. You still want to use a cable gland or something like that with them, because you don't want your cable running against that. You still need to seal the hole. But yeah.
And those Kazakh controllers, I use them myself. They're very convenient. So basically, you have an interface on your phone or on your laptop to control power. Yeah.
Yeah, that's made life a lot simpler. I don't have to get on a ladder or pull out segments of the mast to get up in there.
One question for me is, why put it up on the mast instead of just like on a tripod on the ground?
Well, just to get above the house, so that I could get more of the sky.
Okay.
And I had it already, so.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think that's about it for the questions for now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is an example of one of the visitors. He actually showed up on like the second day, just sitting up there on the housing. And this one just was today. This guy was sitting up on top of the thing, and I happened to look up, so I took a screenshot.
What is that? That thing looks enormous.
So you can see that today it was about 80 Fahrenheit, 27 Celsius outside, and the sensor was at about 44 C. But it was reasonably cloudy today, so not a lot of sunlight beating directly on the thing. And then there's some other things that you can end up seeing that end up being pretty cool. This was a passing thunderstorm. And although you can see all the raindrops on there, so the flashes in the sky are the lightning. The flashes that light up the trees are headlights that are driving by on the street. But this looks much more scary on the all-sky camera than it actually was in person.
The all-sky camera that the Dayton, Ohio Astronomy Club maintains for meteorite or meteor detection actually caught some of those lightning sprites one time, which is thought to be the first observed instance of sprites in Ohio.
Wow.
Now this one is like motion detected, where like when it spots something flash across the sky, it records the last so many seconds of video, which would be a cool feature to include in for Thomas to include in his software.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can catch some interesting stuff sometimes.
Linda, are you ever worried about your mast being a lightning rod?
Not too much. It's not really, right now, it's not higher than the house. It's about the same level of the house. I'm more worried about wind blowing it over, because right now I don't have a good place to secure it because it's on a patio and I don't have any place to run guy wires. But I'm not too concerned about being a lightning rod at this point. You mentioned about the meteor, Molly. A couple of weeks ago, we actually had a daytime fireball go overhead. I heard the sonic boom when I was in here working.
Oh, wow.
I unfortunately, I didn't have the camera. I don't have the camera set to record daytime pictures, so I didn't get any record of it. And I'm not sure I would have anyway, because it was overcast that day, so I'm not sure I would have had anything to see. but it would have been cool to do that. It almost had me rethinking whether I should do that, but I don't have enough storage on the Pi right now.
That's cool.
So this is another thing that the all-sky camera can show you. You can see that my sky quality meter is showing this, that is going up as the moon is getting lower. And you can see on the camera that we're getting more contrast in the sky, and you can see the Milky Way come out. And so that's, just, you can get a very good qualitative measure of the sky just by looking at this picture. Like I can tell by looking at this that the transparency was not great this night. This was dealing with some of the smoke from out west. And you can really see it around the horizon, that kind of gray smear on the horizon all the way around. That's caused by the smoke from the California and Northwest fires.
Still 21 magnitudes per arc second. It's a good night for me if I get 19.
Yeah, I moved from like 18.9 to, on the best night I've had here, it's been 21.5, but 21.1 is pretty typical, at least when the moon's not up. So if you want to get, I'll make this article live as soon as we're done here. But if you go to my website, lindasastronomyadventures.space, you can get the links to the parts that I used and some other substitute parts if you want to do some, a more conventional style of build. And then for finding me, you can find me at my website, lindasastronomyadventures.space. If you search for that same thing on YouTube, Linda's Astronomy Adventures, you can find me, or an Astrobin. My user ID there is AC4LT, which is my amateur radio call sign. Just remember, alternating current for Linda's Toys. And you can find me there. So I will give a small overview of the software if people still want me to keep talking, if people are not tired of it yet.
We got plenty of time, so continue on.
Okay, so this is the admin view of the software. It just runs in a browser. It's pointing at the Pi that's outside my house right now. And right now, every 20 seconds, it's taking a picture. You can see it's reasonably cloudy. And you can see the current reading from the sky quality meter. Whenever it's cloudier, the number on this goes down, of course, because we're getting more light reflected off the clouds. So one of the things you can get here is you can tell it how many days of images to save. In my case, I've got it saving 10 days of images. And so you can see, like, here was oops, that's tonight, not last night. So that image doesn't exist yet. You can see the keyogram from last night. You can see the videos. You can see it was raining that night, at least at the beginning. I could just watch these time lapses all night long. They almost make clouds tolerable, almost. You can see the reflection off the lens as the moon comes up. So you can get that sort of stuff. Now, there's a whole bunch of settings that you can get into here. For the most part, you don't really need to get into them too much. Generally, you're going to want auto exposure. You're going to want to set your maximum auto exposure. This is in milliseconds. At night, this manual exposure is kind of the starting exposure if you're on auto exposure. The delay is the delay between exposures. I just have it set to 10 milliseconds for nighttime. And then the nighttime gain to use. You can set the binning on your camera if you want. You can control the white balance. That's really awkward. You have to kind of fiddle with it until you get what you like. Whole bunch of other settings. Now here's where you can set the time format that you want, whether you want it to show the temperature and to show the exposures and the gain. At daytime, it always uses gain 0. And then this is how I'm getting that file in there. This points to the text file where I write that extra information. And you have some control over some colors and font sizes and that sort of thing. If you have a cooled ZWO camera, you can turn that on and set your target temperature. And you need to set your latitude and longitude so that it knows when your sunrise and sunset times are. And this angle is the point at which it goes into night mode. So in my case, when the sun is 6 degrees below the horizon, I transition to taking nighttime photos from daytime photos. You can actually have it take dark frames. When you turn this on, cover up the camera, and it'll start taking dark frames, and it saves them on the disk saved by sensor temperature, and then it'll pick the current dark that matches the sensor temperature to do a subtraction. So if you've taken the darks, it'll use them automatically. This is where you can get to some other settings. For example, how many frames per second the time lapse should be, whether it should calculate the keyogram and upload it somewhere, whether it should calculate the star trails and upload them, auto delete, how many days to keep, that sort of thing. There are other files here you can edit. I won't get into the details of them. For the most part, you shouldn't need to bother with anything but this and possibly the FTP settings, which is where you tell it what to where to upload your files. This shows a little bit of LAN information. In our case, we're in the WLAN 0, which is the Wi-Fi, so there's no packets going back and forth. But if we go to the WLAN information, you can see that your stuff is doing something. My link quality isn't great, but it's stable, so that seems to work. You can configure your Wi-Fi here if you haven't done that outside of this software. Of course, odds are if you're doing that, you're connected through an Ethernet cable so you can get to the Pi to start with. You can change the password for this software because this admin software is password protected, and you can change the user ID. You can see some basic information about the Pi. Generally on the Pi 4, the CPU load is going to be very low, except during the morning where it's calculating and generating the time-lapse videos and keyograms. The CPU temperature in my case seems to kind of be in the 40s, except during the summer this got up into the 50s. And then the current disk usage, which is the SD card that's plugged into your Pi. In my case, I have a fairly small 16 gigabyte card, so at some point I need to get a bigger SD card. And you can start and stop the actual AllSky software, not the website, but the software that runs behind the website that's taking the pictures. So if you need to restart that software for some reason, you can do that. And then you can reboot or shut down the Pi from here. If you want to use light mode, you can do that, or dark mode. Now, there's also a website. You wouldn't want this website to be public because it gives people access to too much control. But there is a public-facing website that Thomas built that you can either run on the Pi, or in my case, I'm running it on my NAS device. And this is showing a live view of the current picture. It can even do an overlay of where the stars ought to be. This is a little awkward to set up. Mine's not perfect, but it's close. You can get to all sorts of this. This will store up files indefinitely. So in my case, at the end of the night, I have it upload this data to my NAS. You can see the star trails. Like we can grab, well, that one's not a good one. We can grab them here. How good the star trail image is going to be really depends on what your sky conditions were. You can get to your keyograms, maybe. There we go. So you can see this was a pretty cloudy night. And this was a night that wasn't great, but you can see you had a little bit of clearing in there. And then the other thing, you can put this little overlay to tell people, you know, your approximate location and what kind of equipment is being used. So in general, and then if you come back to this on the admin software, if you come back to this page, it starts out giving you a little overlay telling you what your daytime and nighttime exposures are, which you can get rid of if you want. Let me...
Linda,
Yeah.
Have you ever tried processing some of your videos as we process, say, DSOs?
No, I've thought about it, but I haven't actually tried that.
Because it occurs to me that you might get some significant enhancement of some of your videos with a little work in like Adobe Premiere.
Yeah, I do have Final Cut Pro, so I could bring one in there and try it, but I haven't had a chance to do that yet. I definitely need to get there at some point. Let me show you some other pictures. This is that reflective material that I talked about. In this case, I was trying it everywhere at first, and I ultimately took some of it out because it seemed that having it only on the sides that were facing south and top did the best job. And you can also see the fabric that I put up there to help. Oops. And then, let's see, I don't think I took any pictures with the Casa power strips in there. I should have done that. But this shows you how the cables feed through from the inside. So it all works pretty well. And these cable glands give you a good grip on the cable so they don't flop around. So I think that kind of covers everything. Yeah. Any other questions?
Just some people chit-chatting about one of the contributors to All Skies actually in the chat tonight, Michael Kidd.
Oh, great.
He's answering some questions about compatibility and whatnot.
I think people are already accumulating parts, Linda.
Yeah, I think so.
It really is.
They're making their list. They're ready to start building.
I mean, if I can build one of these, and I am the least competent handy woman in the world, anyone can.
Linda, could I add a few things if you don't mind?
Of course.
Yeah, I've got a couple of I've built a couple of these, and some things I wasn't aware of when I first built it. It was when I first I had an acrylic dome and I used silicon to seal it, and I had assembled the whole box at that point. That's a bad thing to do because it'll off gas and it can actually attack the inside surface of the acrylic dome. So if you keep that separate and don't assemble it straight away like I did, you'd save the whole thing of having to get another dome. Luckily, I had several domes. I knocked it off and put the other one on. So that's something to watch for. And I did use a glass lens from AliExpress for about $10. You can find them, but you have to make sure it's glass because the plastic ones will start decoloring. You can attack the reflections by using high temperature barbecue paint. That paint is quite unique in that it hasn't got dyes in it, which can, especially for astrophotography, you can pick up interesting reflections from the dyes alone. And so you can.
Did you put that paint on the camera?
Yeah, you can paint it on because it's just an anodized thing. So because you're not, it typically won't stick very well, but you can do that. In my case, I built an annulus that I slid over top of the lens and painted that with the black dye. and that
Okay.
stopped all those interesting, funky reflections that you were experiencing.
Yeah, I did that with fabric instead of
Yeah,
metal.
yeah,
But
and
yeah,
fabric is great because it's uneven. That's exactly what you want.
yeah,
You can also leverage the built-in sun weight to turn heaters on and off. In my case, I have heaters because they are required. If I don't have them, it does mist up on the outside. And I just have a little pulse width modulator inside that, just that's when the sun sets, I turn the heaters on, sun comes up, I turn the heaters back off.
yeah. I was expecting dew to be a problem because it's very humid here in the summer, and we've had plenty of 100% humidity nights.
Well,
And
it's
it
excellent
hasn't.
that you do. Yeah, it's excellent that you don't have to, because why make things too complex?
Yeah,
Yeah, I had to, unfortunately. Yeah, that's about it. It's little things to watch for. The silicon was the big one for me. That I actually wrecked a dome doing that.
yeah. But the All Sky software package is really great, and
It's
I know it's a little.
excellent. Yeah.
It's intimidating if you've never put a pie together and done that sort of thing. It's probably harder than putting the housing and camera together. But it's not that hard, and there are some good how-to videos on it. Like I said, it would have taken too long to go through all of that live here.
Yeah,
It wouldn't.
one thing I had considered, but I didn't, was trying to power it with power over Ethernet, because you could just run an Ethernet cable out
Yeah,
to where you're going, and that would just have one cable. It supplies power and everything. And if you, in your case, you need to reboot it and you couldn't get near it, you could just unplug it at the router.
right.
So it would, yeah, very, very simple, and it would give off a bit of extra heat as well to keep your
Yeah,
dome clear.
when I get the
if you
observatory
use-
built, that's probably what I'll do.
If you use PoE, how many devices can you power? That's not carrying.
Well, with the Pi, there's a little thing that you like, a little daughter board that attaches to the Pi, which with a bunch of pins. So it'll take the power out of the Ethernet and power the Pi with that. So does that answer your question, Eric?
Well, you have other devices to power in there.
In my case, yeah, but most people wouldn't. I mean, if you were just and when I get the observatory built, I won't have all these things in one box. So I won't have to worry about that. I'll power them each separately. But the doing the power over Ethernet is definitely convenient.
It's just something else to consider. I had looked at doing that. I didn't have any. I'm running a Raspberry Pi 3 on both of them. And I don't think they were available when I first built them. So I have a run of wire going out there, which I can toggle the machine off remotely with IP switching. So I cut the power if it ever has to. Yeah. Okay, that's all I wanted to say. Sorry.
No.
Okay.
Molly, are there any other questions?
Yeah,
So if you have any questions over on the chat, please put them in now.
just more chit chat with Michael on support things for the All Sky software.
Yeah, I see Steve is over there asking questions. Steve doesn't live far from me, so looks like he's going to build one. I know he has an observatory down in central Illinois.
This would be more applicable to those running remote observatories. Mine is unmanned, and I haven't been out there for, well over a year now. And I do leverage the All Sky camera to do other things, like as a VPN server. I can get in there and toggle equipment independently of everything else. So if my PC were to lock up, I could hop onto the Raspberry Pi. I could cut the power to the PC and restart it. So you could have it doing other things. The Raspberry Pi is actually quite a powerful computer. It's very cheap to run electricity-wise.
And if people are interested, I can go through how I got the sky quality information in there in just a couple of minutes if people are interested.
Yeah, that'd be great. That's awesome. Yeah.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, that would be handy instead of me going and comparing timestamps.
Let me.
I did recently write some code to at least plot and calculate the average min and max sky quality for me. But having the overlay is pretty cool.
Okay. Oh. Sometimes that works and sometimes that doesn't. Okay, so the goal is to get this file written. You can see this looks like exactly what we were seeing on the screen. And so this is a little shell script which uses, I have one of the Unihedron SQM LE sky quality meters. So the sky quality meter is accessed over Ethernet. And they provide these sample programs, and I just used one called sqmsocket.py, which goes out and gives you a reading from the meter. And I save that reading to this sqmdata.txt. If that works, I then extract the number from it and then write out the text file line that I want, this sqm blah, blah, blah thing. So that gets the information done there. And then you can ignore these because they're not being used. And then there's a weather package that I just downloaded for the Pi. And you need to figure out the FIPS code for your area and how long it should cache. In my case, I have it caching for 10 minutes because it's really slow to go out there and grab this information. So I didn't want it doing it every time. Didn't want to get somebody at the other end of the internet mad at me. And then it saves that information to this weather file. We grab out the temperature and the humidity lines. At one point I was grabbing out the wind information, but it proved so inaccurate as to be misleading. So I stopped actually including that. And then add that information into, so I grabbed all that information and put it together. And that's how that information gets into the sky quality meter. I know there's a lot of gobbledygook on the screen there, but you can see it's not very long. For anybody that has any familiarity with shell scripting, it's a pretty straightforward thing to do.
Linda, is your sky quality meter, is that inside the dome with your camera or outside?
No. Let me go back to that picture.
And she had it strapped to the side of the same pole that
Yes.
the all sky camera is strapped to, way up there in the sky.
Yeah.
Do you have to perform maintenance on the sky quality meter? Does it get dirty or?
Presumably, you might need to clean the window periodically, but where is that picture?
Linda, are you going to post some of this material online so that if anyone's interested, they could go and download it?
Yeah, there'll be, if you go to Linda's Astronomy Adventures.space, it'll be right up there on the front page after this presentation is done. And then, you can always, it'll be there. Oh, I didn't hit share. No wonder nobody's seeing anything. Let me see. I can find my mouse. So this is the sky quality meter, and it's just in a little PVC housing. And some people build their Pi and their camera inside something similar to this. But they've got a little window up there. And then the camera is on the other side of this. Let me see if we have a better picture. Yeah.
And that is a completely standalone device, is it?
Yeah. Yeah, and I needed to get power, and since I couldn't really run Ethernet from outside the house to inside the house, so I needed to have a way to get the Ethernet from this onto the Wi-Fi, which putting the travel router in client mode accomplished for me. So I put that and the power for the meter inside the box with the camera.
I love the way you put everything together. It's all really interesting solutions. It's great.
It's all kind of, flying by the seat of my pants.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Well,
Awesome.
I think you've stimulated a lot of people that might want to go out and build this. I think other than for those people that perhaps don't know how to write code.
Well, you don't need to write code for any of this unless you try to do the integration stuff like I did.
Mhm.
If you're just trying to use the sky quality meter on its own, you don't need to write a single line of code. Now, you do need to type in a couple of commands at the Unix command line, but they tell you what they are, so you don't even have to guess there.
Okay, I think any more questions? I don't see any over on YouTube, but this has been a very interesting presentation, Linda, as all your presentations are. So
Thank you so
thank you
much.
very much. And of course, you are invited back anytime you have something else you'd like to share with us. And I have also been asked, since at the beginning of the program not everyone is here, is to remind people to put in their nebula photograph. Just go to our website. I don't think I have to bring it up, and you can just click on the submit button and put in your nebula. And you have till the end of the month to do that. And you can also download the M33 data that I posted up and create your own image. And I think we have a couple people that are going to tell us a little bit more about how they created their image. We have a little time for that, but download it and make your best run at it. And it'll be interesting to see the different interpretations of the same data set. If there's nothing else, I think we're all set for this evening. No other comments? Tim, are you with us?
I'm here.
If nothing else, just take us out. And thanks, everyone. We'll
Thank
see you
you.
next week. Have a
Night,
good
everyone.
week. And remember, it's new moon. So get out there. If you have some clear skies, generate your images, collect data, and hopefully the fires in California won't get you as they have gotten us. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.